Oh, hello, Sunita. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Myaj. Thank you. Good meeting you again.
Good meeting you as well. I wanted to pick your brain about ISO 9001 and ISO 27001, noticing a rise and uptick in there possibly being some overlaps or overlays. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions when it comes to both those standards.
I'm so excited to answer these questions. Let's go for it.
Okay. Well, first off, how does ISO 9001 and ISO 27001 treat risk differently?
From the standard, when the clauses are defined, mandatory requirement, both the standards have risk identification need, risk and opportunity identification need. But 27001 being a holistic and completely around information security takes the risk associated with several aspects, the aspects being risk associated with the assets, because as an organization, there are risks associated with that, the hardware, the software, the infrastructure, the people, some things associated with your businesses. So different asset, those risks, as well as there is a separate section called the Annex. They are controls, risk associated with those Annex requirements. So the scope of identification and handling and treatment of the risk with 27001 is more broader. And hence, there is a specific clauses 6 as well as 8, which are towards identification and treatment of the risk, which are arising from various avenues. 9001 looks at risk and opportunity coming out from the business processes. There's no definite requirement around the assets or any accesses or anything around the threats and vulnerabilities around the infrastructure or anything around what would, like the physical and the environmental risk. None of that is a requirement for 9001. You can identify the process-based risk. In that sense, 27001 is very in-depth and it has a very holistic approach.
I guess I should ask, what does it look like when risk and quality and security end up overlapping?
So as I mentioned, that risk in quality and risk in information security, when they overlap, what that particular log, register, or whatever you want to call, will have a specific category of the different types of assets and different groups. Quality becomes a group within risk assessment where you are saying, okay, these are business and process related risk. These are asset related risk. The assets are further broken down. So these are, business organizational, reputational risk, the risk of, physical and environmental threats. All of those risks becomes like a category and you identify and mitigate and then look at the review treatments of it over a period of time. So it all becomes like a big register or a log, if you will, and the strategy is identified with. I seldom recommend keeping two of these registers. You really want to identify one because that way you can identify the process related risk, and processes have assets associated. So if you think from that standpoint, right? An organization, when we say assets, even if you consider the quality management risk, right? BD process by itself will have a certain CRM, and CRM is an asset. So maybe somebody uses a HubSpot or a Salesforce or whatever, right? That's an asset, and then there are accesses shared. So you can assess those risks and still meet the requirement of 9000, meet the requirement of 27001.
Now, I know that while talking about risk, why is risk and opportunity matrix such a powerful tool?
The reason is information security, as the word says, when we are talking 27001 and we are talking about security, the security is where is the information housed? Now in today's day and age, right? We don't use so much as the paper medium. We use is all electronic. So information is more so in the electronic format. We do have certain paper formats too, but not that much. But information in whatever format it's housed, wherever it's housed, or you have to consider what is when you think of how secure something is, you consider, okay, if this is not secure, what is the risk? You have to take everything from the concept of, okay, is there a risk associated if I keep my brochures outside? Maybe not, because that's a, that is anyways, I'm going to give it in the public hand. Maybe you're going to a conference, or, you're going to a forum where you're going to share that information. It's a public, you put it on your website, it's a public information. But if it were your proposal, which had the pricings on it, do you want it sitting on your table, or do you want it sitting in a drive, which is not secure? Maybe not, right? You want it to be more controlled access, that only few people should have it. So you look at each of this information from the lenses of how secure something is, what is the risk associated. So the entire owners of this standard, 27,001, and the family of 27, because it's not just one standard, there are multiple standards within the family. It is around security. And you have to take the security. Every information is not as important or critical. There is more criticality around certain information. And the standard allows you to basically treat every information in a silo and handle and define the control you want as an organization. Again, remember, the control is in your hand. You're still, as an organization, they are driving everything. And if they say that, okay, some of the information is not as sensitive, yes, by all means, define that control in that particular manner. But it gives you all the tools, and risk is its biggest aspect, how you define it. Larger enterprises where there are thousands of people, there are different processes, process owners, roles and responsibilities are defined. There is a lot of segregation of duties as well. So they handle the risk a little differently. There is more risk in those cases as opposed to a very small organization, all cloud built. Risk is very little on those kinds of organization because not a lot of tools are interacting, and everything again being in cloud, limited people accessing. There is still not that many chances of information getting compromised. Yes, the threat agents are there, meaning your environment, your perimeters, you need to harden them or beef them up from the aspect that, yes, there are external vulnerabilities from hacking and so on and so forth, that nobody escapes those things.
Yeah.
But this allows us you to consider those risks and only work on the aspects which apply to you. So risk is very predominant. You will see that into the discussion. The standard is risk based. You check, first of all, take into account every system that you have and think from the standpoint of what risk is associated with each different system, information housed within them, information that you as an organization handle.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And you mentioned before about Annex. So my other question would be, ISO 27001 does have Annex A, and then ISO 9001 has clauses, but how should businesses keep track of these without missing critical requirements?
Both the standards have mandatory clauses. It goes from clause 1 to clause 10. And there is a good bit of overlap, except for clause number 8, which in 9001 is all the operations related, and 27001 is all risk related. That's the only clause which is little different, but other than that, all the mandatory requirement map 1 to 1. And the way this helps is the organization, when they want to implement a certain standard, they can have the same documented information procedure, context of the organization worksheet. They can have, as they call it, the interested parties worksheets. They can have similar documentation for both the standards when they are coming up with, or same document for both and meeting both the requirements. That way, there is a good bit of overlap. 27,001 has additional annex requirement. So in order to meet, if someone says that we have to meet the requirement of 27,001 and we already have 9,000 in place, they still will have to make sure that all the mandatory requirements are tied into the existing 9001. You just cannot just own and assimilate with 9001. You have to make sure that the verbiage is there. As we talked about risk assessment is done a little bit differently, and you want to make sure that the risks are identified in a register and treatments are done. and follow the guideline of 27,001 very thoroughly in that. So mandatory requirements map in a good way, but you still want to make sure that the procedures, the documentation written around 9,001 can accommodate the 27,000. Management review is done little differently. You need to set up the objectives and the policy statements, and also you want to integrate the mandatory requirements and then meet the requirements of the control. Several organizations, when they have these two standards, they just claim that we have 9,001 and they don't integrate the 27,001 verbiage in them. And that's where the non-conformances happen. They are very thorough in their annexes and they're not thorough in the mandatory requirements. So guidance is that you want to handle the corrective actions the same way, management review the same way as you do your 9,001, and keep just one procedures, one documentation around those aspects.